The world knew Gene Kelly as the radiant star who danced through puddles in Singin' in the Rain, the athletic performer who turned city streets into stages in On the Town, and the visionary who blended ballet with Hollywood glitz in An American, in Paris. His smile was infectious, his movements effortless, a man who embodied joy on screen. But behind the technicolor brilliance and the carefully choreographed charm, the real Gene Kelly was far more complex, a figure shrouded in private. Struggles, whispered controversies, and a love story so unconventional it stunned the world. For decades, the darker shades of his life remained untold, locked away by those who knew him best. That is, until his widow, Patricia Ward Kelly, finally broke her silence after 30 years, revealing a side of the legend no one saw coming. Patricia was just 26 years old when she met the Hollywood icon, a man 47 years her senior. What began as a professional collaboration, a job interview for a documentary she was writing, morphed into a romance that defied expectations. Their love story, punctuated by raised eyebrows and tabloid scrutiny, was only the beginning of the secrets she would later unveil. Gene Kelly, the man who taught the world to dance with abandon, was nothing like his sunny on-screen persona. He was a perfectionist who left co-stars bruised, a workaholic who prioritized art over personal bonds, and a man whose private life was as turbulent as his choreography was precise. Patricia's revelations peeled back the layers of his carefully constructed image, exposing the family dramas, the on-set tensions, and the emotional scars that shaped him. Born Eugene Curran Kelly on August 23, 1912, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Gene was the third of 5 children in a working-class Irish-American family. His father, James, was a traveling salesman scraping by on $75 a week, while his mother, Harriet, held the household together, instilling in her children a love for music and dance despite their financial strain. Young Gene was a ball of energy, more interested in baseball, skating, and swimming than in the dance classes his mother forced him into. At 8 years old, he quit after just a few lessons, humiliated by the stigma that boys didn't dance. But Harriet, relentless, worked as a receptionist at the dance school and slowly coaxed him back. By 14, something clicked. Gene realized dance demanded the same athleticism as sports, the same precision as a shortstop's throw. It was a revelation that would alter the course of his life, and eventually, the course of Hollywood history. Lead. Great Depression upended his family's stability, forcing Gene to drop out of Pennsylvania State University, where he'd been studying economics. He returned home, pumping gas, laying bricks, and serving sodas to help make ends meet. Yet even during those grueling years, dance remained his escape. By night, he and his brother Fred performed in talent shows and smoky Pennsylvania nightclubs, honing a style that was raw, energetic, and utterly unique. In 1932, at just 20 years old, Gene co-founded the Gene Kelly Studio of Dance in Pittsburgh, revolutionizing how dance was taught. Unlike traditional studios, Gene focused on making dance accessible to boys, framing it as a sport, a blend of strength, agility, and artistry. His approach was a hit, attracting over 150 students annually and cementing his reputation as a prodigy with a vision. But Pittsburgh couldn't contain his ambition. In 1938, Gene gambled everything on a one-way ticket to New York City, where he scrapped for work as a Broadway choreographer. His big break came later that year in Cole Porter's Leave It to Me, where he shared the stage with Mary Martin during her show-stopping performance of My Heart Belongs to Daddy. Though his role was small, his talent was undeniable. By 1940, he was starring in Pal Joey, a morally ambiguous musical that showcased his ability to play charming yet flawed characters, a duality that mirrored his own life. Critics were divided on the show's darker themes, but Gene's performance was electrifying, catching the eye of Hollywood scouts. His transition to film was rocky. Initially sidelined by producer David O. Selznick, Gene languished without roles, until a loan out to MGM for Me and My Gal, 1942, paired him with Judy Garland. The film was a hit, but behind the scenes, Gene clashed with director Busby Berkeley, whose rigid choreography clashed with Gene's fluid, athletic style. It was a tension that would define his career. Gene Kelly didn't just want to perform, he wanted to reinvent. By 1945's Anchors Aweigh, he'd done just that, pioneering the integration of live action and animation in a groundbreaking dance sequence with Jerry Mouse, a last-minute replacement after Disney refused to lend Mickey. The scene, painstakingly crafted frame by frame, earned him his sole Oscar nomination for acting and solidified his reputation as a cinematic innovator. Yet, for all his professional triumphs, Gene's personal life was a tapestry of tumult. His first marriage to 17-year-old Betsy Blair in 1941 collapsed under the weight of political scandals. Her Marxist ties drew FBI scrutiny, and his obsessive work ethic. His second marriage to choreographer Gene Coyne, formerly wed to his collaborator Stanley Donen, was shadowed by rumors of betrayal and ended tragically with her death from leukemia in 1973. It was only in his final chapter with Patricia Ward that Gene seemed to find peace, though their age gap ignited relentless gossip. Patricia, now the fierce guardian of his legacy, has spent decades dismantling myths, like the infamous claim that he brutalized Debbie Reynolds on Singin' in the Rain, while preserving the truth of a man who was equal parts genius and contradiction. Gene. Kelly's story isn't just one of glittering achievements, it's a tale of sacrifice, obsession, and the price of perfection. And it begins with a widow's decision, after 30 years of silence, to finally let the world see the man behind the myth. Gene Kelly's journey from the working-class streets of Pittsburgh to the dazzling lights of Broadway was anything but easy. It was a path paved with financial hardship, relentless determination, and a series of pivotal moments that would shape him into one of the most revolutionary performers of the 20th century. His story wasn't one of overnight success. It was a slow, grueling climb, marked by setbacks, reinventions, and an unshakable belief in his own vision. Born into a family where money was always tight, Gene's early years were defined by resilience. His father, James Kelly, traveled constantly for work, leaving his mother, Harriet, to manage the household and instill in their 5 children a love for the arts. Though Gene initially resisted dance, embarrassed by the stigma that it wasn't a manly pursuit, Harriet's persistence paid off. By his teens, he had discovered that dance wasn't just graceful, it was athletic, demanding the same precision and discipline as the sports he loved. This realization changed everything. Dance was no longer just an obligation, it was a passion, a way to channel his boundless energy into something extraordinary. But passion alone couldn't shield him from the harsh realities of the Great Depression. When the economy collapsed in 1929, Gene was forced to drop out of Pennsylvania State University, where he had been studying economics. Returning home to Pittsburgh, he took whatever odd jobs he could find, laying bricks, pumping gas, serving sodas at a local shop, just to help his family survive. Yet, even during those exhausting days, he refused to abandon dance. By night, he and his older brother Fred performed in talent shows and smoky nightclubs, earning a few dollars at a time, while sharpening their craft. These gigs weren't glamorous, but they were crucial. They taught Gene how to command a stage, how to connect with an audience, and, most importantly, how to make every movement count. By 1932, at just 20 years old, Gene had saved enough to co-found the Gene Kelly Studio of Dance in Pittsburgh. This wasn't just a dance school, it was a rebellion against tradition. At a time when ballet was seen as elitist and rigid, Gene's approach was fresh and accessible. He marketed dance to boys by comparing it to sports, emphasizing strength, agility, and competition. His classes weren't about delicate pirouettes. They were about power, rhythm, and raw energy. Word spread quickly, and within a year, the studio was thriving, attracting over 150 students. Soon, the Kelly family opened a second location in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, solidifying Gene's reputation as a visionary teacher. For 6 years, Gene built his name in Pittsburgh's theater scene, choreographing local productions and refining his signature style, a blend of ballet technique and streetwise athleticism. But he wanted more. Broadway was the dream. And in 1938, he took the leap, moving to New York City with little more than ambition and a handful of connections. The transition was brutal. At first, he could only find work behind the scenes, assisting choreographers and staging small revues. But his big break came later that year when he was cast in Cole Porter's Leave It to Me. Though his role was minor, playing the secretary to an American ambassador, the show was a smash, thanks in large part to Mary Martin's show-stopping. Performance of My Heart Belongs to Daddy. Gene watched, learned, and absorbed everything he could from Martin's star power, recognizing that great performers didn't just dance, they told stories. His next breakthrough came in 1940 with Pal Joey, a daring musical that cast him as Joey Evans, a sleazy but charismatic nightclub performer. The role was risky. Joey was no traditional hero, but Gene embraced the complexity, infusing the character with a dangerous charm that audiences couldn't resist. The show's director, George Abbott, later recalled how Gene would stay late after rehearsals, obsessively practicing under a single lamp until every step was flawless. That relentless perfectionism paid off. Pal Joey ran for 374 performances, becoming one of the longest-running Rodgers and Hart musicals of its time. More importantly, it proved Gene could carry a show, not just as a dancer, but as a leading man. Yet even as his Broadway star rose, Hollywood remained a distant dream. When MGM initially expressed interest, they hesitated. Gene wasn't the typical matinee idol. He wasn't classically handsome like Fred Astaire. His appeal was rougher, more masculine, more modern. But Gene refused to conform. He believed dance could be more than tuxedos and top hats. It could be gritty, emotional, even rebellious. That conviction would soon redefine the movie musical. In 1942, his persistence paid off when MGM cast him opposite Judy Garland in It's Me and My Gal. The film was a hit, but behind the scenes, Gene clashed with director Busby Berkeley, whose old-school choreography clashed with Gene's dynamic, naturalistic style. Where Berkeley wanted precision and symmetry, Gene wanted spontaneity and sweat. The tension was palpable, but the result was electrifying. Audiences had never seen a dancer like him. He didn't just glide across the screen, he lunged, leaped, and made every step feel real. By 1945's Anchors Aweigh, Gene wasn't just a star, he was an innovator. His iconic dance with Jerry Mouse, a last-minute replacement after Disney refused to lend Mickey, was a technical marvel, blending live action and animation in a way that had never been done before. The sequence took months to perfect, with Gene performing alone in an empty studio while animators painstakingly matched Jerry's movements to his. The effort paid off. The scene became legendary, earning Gene his first and only Oscar nomination for acting. But Gene wasn't content with just performing. He wanted control. By the late 1940s, he was pushing MGM to let him co-direct, convinced that musicals could be more than escapist fluff. They could be art. That ambition would soon give birth to his greatest masterpieces. But first, he had to survive the cutthroat world of Hollywood politics, where friendships were fragile and rivalries ran deep. Gene Kelly arrived in Hollywood at a pivotal moment in film history. The golden age of movie musicals was dawning, and MGM, the studio, that would become synonymous with the genre, was searching for fresh talent. But Kelly wasn't content to simply fill the shoes of previous dance stars like Fred Astaire. He had a radically different vision for what dance on film could be. More athletic, more cinematic, more emotionally raw. His early years in Tinseltown were marked by both triumph and frustration as he fought to bring this vision to life, often clashing with studio executives who preferred the polished elegance of traditional musicals. His breakthrough came in 1942's For Me and My Gal opposite Judy Garland. But even then, Kelly chafed against the constraints of old Hollywood. Director Busby Berkeley's rigid, geometric choreography felt antithetical to Kelly's naturalistic style, which emphasized storytelling through movement rather than spectacle for spectacle's sake. The tension between these two approaches would define Kelly's early career and ultimately lead to his reinvention of the movie musical. By 1944's CoverGirl, Kelly was beginning to assert more creative control. His now legendary alter ego dance sequence, where he performed opposite a ghostly double of himself, showcased his growing ambition as both a dancer and filmmaker. The technical challenges were staggering. Kelly had to perform the entire routine twice, with exact precision, so the two versions could be seamlessly superimposed. The result was a cinematic first, blending technical wizardry with profound emotional resonance. But it was 1945's Anchors Aweigh that truly announced Kelly as an innovator. His dance with Jerry the Mouse, created after Disney refused permission to use Mickey, required Kelly to perform alone for hours in an empty studio while animators painstakingly matched the cartoon's movements to his. The sequence's playful magic belied its painstaking creation. Each frame had to be hand-painted to maintain perspective, with animators studying Kelly's movements through a process called rotoscoping. When the film earned 5 Oscar nominations, including Kelly's sole Best Actor nod, it cemented his status as Hollywood's most daring dance pioneer. Kelly's creative peak arrived in the early 1950s with back-to-back masterpieces that redefined what musicals could achieve. An American in Paris, 1951, was his most audacious work yet. A 17-minute ballet sequence set to Gershwin's symphonic poem that cost over $500,000, a staggering sum at the time. Director Vincente Minnelli initially balked at the extravagance, but Kelly insisted the sequence was essential. He trained for months in classical ballet, determined to prove that movie musicals could be high art. The gamble paid off when the film won 6 Oscars, including Best Picture, only the second musical ever to do so. But it was 1952's Singin' in the Rain that would become Kelly's enduring legacy. Co-directed with Stanley Donen, the film was both a loving satire of Hollywood's transition to talkies and a showcase for Kelly's most iconic moments. The title number, with Kelly dancing through a studio-made storm, became cinema history, though few knew he filmed it with a 103-degree fever. The water pressure kept fluctuating due to Culver City residents watering their lawns, requiring multiple takes as Kelly, drenched and exhausted, maintained his beaming smile. His perfectionism reached new heights during the Good Morning routine, where he drilled 19-year-old Debbie Reynolds through 15-hour rehearsals until her feet bled. While later accounts would sensationalize these sessions, they exemplified Kelly's unrelenting standards. He believed greatness required sacrifice. Behind the camera, Kelly was revolutionizing how musicals were made. Rejecting the static, stage-bound conventions of earlier films, he insisted on dynamic camera movements that followed the dance. For On the Town, 1949, he took cameras into real New York locations, a first for musicals, capturing the city's energy in ways sound stages never could. His innovative use of split screen in It's Always Fair Weather, 1955, allowed 3 dancers to share a frame while appearing to interact, a technical marvel requiring split-second timing. Kelly saw musical numbers not as interludes, but as vital storytelling tools. In Brigadoon, 1954, he used dance to express longing and enchantment. In Invitation to the Dance, 1956, his passion project blending live action with animation, he pushed boundaries even when audiences didn't follow. Yet for all his professional triumphs, Kelly's personal relationships suffered under his relentless drive. His marriage to Betsy Blair collapsed under the weight of her political blacklisting and his workaholism. His subsequent union with Jean Coyne, former wife of collaborator Stanley Donen, fueled industry whispers. On set, his intensity alienated some. Esther Williams called working with him pure misery, while Sid Charisse admitted dancing with him left her bruised. But these contradictions defined Kelly, the artist who demanded perfection, yet championed spontaneity, the egalitarian who made dance accessible, yet ruled his sets like a tyrant. By the late 1950s, as Hollywood musicals waned, Kelly transitioned to directing dramas like The Tunnel of Love, 1958, and the expensive misfire Hello, Dolly, 1969. Though his later years were quieter, his influence endured. From West Side Story to La La Land, every cinematic dancer owes him a debt. Gene Kelly didn't just perform, he transformed the language of film itself, one revolutionary step at a time. Behind Gene Kelly's radiant on-screen persona lay a complex web of personal struggles and turbulent relationships that contrasted sharply with his carefully cultivated public image. The man who brought effortless joy to millions through his dance routines often failed to translate that warmth into his private life, leaving behind a trail of strained friendships, broken marriages, and whispered about on-set behavior that would later become the subject of Hollywood legend. His first marriage to Betsy Blair in 1941, when she was just 17 and he was 28, began as a fairy tale romance but gradually unraveled under the pressures of fame, politics, and Kelly's obsessive work ethic. Blair, who would later earn an Academy Award nomination for her role in 1955's Marty, found herself caught between her own burgeoning career and her husband's relentless perfectionism. The final blow came when Blair's leftist political affiliations drew the attention of the House Un-American Activities Committee during the Red Scare, putting Kelly's carefully built career at risk. Though he initially stood by her, the strain proved too much, and their 16-year marriage ended in 1957, with Blair moving to Europe where she could work freely. Kelly rarely spoke publicly about the divorce, but friends noted how deeply it affected him, revealing a vulnerability the public never saw. Kelly's second marriage to Jean Coyne in 1960 created even more industry gossip, not just because of their 17-year age difference, but because Coyne had previously been married to Stanley Donen, Kelly's longtime collaborator and co-director on Singin' in the Rain. The romantic triangle created a professional rift that never fully healed, with Donen reportedly feeling betrayed by both his former wife and his creative partner. Those close to the situation described Kelly and Coyne's relationship as both passionate and creatively symbiotic. She had been his dance assistant for years and understood his artistic vision like no one else. Their marriage produced 2 children and appeared stable until tragedy struck in 1973, when Coyne died of leukemia at just 50 years old. Friends said Kelly was devastated, losing not just a wife, but his most trusted artistic confidant. He withdrew from the spotlight for years afterward, focusing on raising their children while his own career entered something of a twilight period. The grief seemed to soften some of Kelly's harder edges, with colleagues noting he became more reflective about his life and legacy in subsequent years. On film sets, Kelly's perfectionism often manifested in ways that created lasting tensions with his co-stars. The most famous example came during the making of Singin' in the Rain in 1952, when 19-year-old Debbie Reynolds, with no formal dance training, was cast opposite the 39-year-old veteran. Accounts of their working relationship vary wildly depending on the source. Reynolds herself gave conflicting statements over the years, sometimes describing Kelly as a harsh taskmaster who worked her to exhaustion. Other times acknowledging his methods ultimately made her a better performer. What's undisputed is that the infamous good morning routine pushed Reynolds to her physical limits, with rehearsals so grueling she reportedly collapsed under a piano at one point, her feet bleeding through her shoes. Studio doctors allegedly found her heart rate dangerously low from exhaustion, though Patricia Ward Kelly would later dispute some of these claims when protecting her husband's legacy. Similar stories emerged from other films. Esther Williams described working with Kelly on Take Me Out to the Ball Game as pure misery, citing his constant criticism of her dancing, despite her being primarily a swimmer. Sid Charisse, while admiring Kelly's genius, noted that dancing with him left her frequently bruised from his powerful, athletic style. Yet these professional conflicts only told part of the story. Many of Kelly's collaborators, including screenwriters Betty Comden and Adolph Green, spoke of his generosity and loyalty once he trusted someone creatively. His relationship with Judy Garland remained warm throughout their lives, dating back to when she insisted MGM cast him in For Me and My Gal over the studio's initial reluctance. Younger dancers he mentored, like Tommy Rawl, described him as surprisingly patient and encouraging behind the scenes. This dichotomy, the demanding perfectionist versus the supportive mentor, became one of the defining contradictions of Kelly's personality. Even his children described 2 different versions of their father: the intense artist who could be emotionally distant when consumed by work, and the playful, affectionate parent who created elaborate puppet shows for them at home. The final chapter of Kelly's personal life began in 1985, when, at age 72, he met 26-year-old Patricia Ward while working on a Smithsonian documentary. Their 47-year age difference became instant tabloid fodder, but those close to the couple insisted the intellectual and emotional connection was genuine. Patricia, a writer with no prior knowledge of Kelly's fame when they met, became his companion, collaborator, and eventually his wife in 1990. She provided stability in his later years as he battled the strokes that would eventually claim his life in 1996. Since his death, Patricia has fiercely guarded his legacy, challenging unflattering biographies and opposing unauthorized biopics while working to preserve his artistic contributions. Their unconventional love story, like so much of Kelly's life, defied easy categorization. Another complex layer in the life of a man who revolutionized dance on film, but remained, in many ways, an enigma off-screen. The full measure of Gene. Kelly's personal relationships reveals a man as multifaceted as his art, capable of great warmth and startling harshness, profound loyalty, and painful estrangements. His personal life lacked the neat resolution of his movie musicals, leaving behind questions even his widow's revelations couldn't entirely answer. What remains undeniable is how these experiences, the triumphs, the heartbreaks, the controversies, fueled the emotional depth he brought to his performances, transforming technical brilliance into something authentically human. The same intensity that strained his personal relationships became the raw material for his art, suggesting that perhaps Kelly's greatest love affair was always with the work itself. Gene Kelly's life was a masterpiece of contradictions. The smiling dancer who brought joy to millions while wrestling with private demons. The perfectionist who demanded brutal rehearsals, yet created some of cinema's most spontaneous feeling moments. The Hollywood legend whose final love story defied convention. For decades, the full truth about this icon remained hidden behind the glittering facade of his films, known only to those who worked closely with him. Until now. We've pulled back the curtain on Kelly's remarkable journey, from the Pittsburgh Dance Studio, where he first discovered his passion, to the sound stages, where he revolutionized movie musicals forever. But this is just the beginning of the story. The Bidewijk world of classic Hollywood is filled with these untold narratives, stories of ambition, scandal, and artistry that never made it into the official biographies. What really happened between Kelly and Stanley Donen after their bitter falling out? How did Judy Garland's support early in Kelly's career shape their lifelong friendship? What other industry secrets did Patricia Ward Kelly uncover during those private years as Gene's confidant and wife? These are the questions that mainstream documentaries often overlook, but we're committed to bringing you the unfiltered truth. By subscribing to our channel, you'll gain access to exclusive deep dives into Hollywood's most fascinating figures. Imagine getting the backstory on Fred Astaire's rivalry with Kelly, complete with never-before-seen rehearsal footage. Picture learning about the dark side of MGM's golden age through the eyes of the performers who lived it. We're talking about content you won't find anywhere else. Meticulously researched, richly detailed, and always focused on the human stories behind the silver screen legends. Your engagement helps us uncover even more hidden histories. When you like this video, it signals to YouTube that these in-depth explorations matter, that there's an audience hungry for substance beyond the usual clickbait. Each share introduces new viewers to these carefully crafted narratives, allowing us to grow our archive of cinematic storytelling. We're already working on our next exposé. Hint, it involves another dancing legend and a shocking career downfall that changed Hollywood forever. And with your support, we can make it our most ambitious project yet. Don't just watch history, be part of preserving it. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we drop new content, and join the conversation in the comments below. What surprised you most about Gene Kelly's real story? Which Hollywood icon should we profile next? Your input directly shapes our future content. For those who want to go even deeper, check out the link in our description for access to extended interviews, rare photographs, and our complete bibliography of sources. The magic of old Hollywood wasn't just what happened on camera. It's in these untold stories of struggle, innovation, and sometimes scandal that made the films possible. Gene Kelly didn't just dance in the rain. He weathered storms both professional and personal to leave an indelible mark on cinema. Now it's your turn to take the next step. Subscribe today, and let's keep these vital stories alive for generations of film lovers to come. Because the greatest movies ever made deserve to have their full stories told. No filters, no studio interference. Just the truth behind the legend.